We have really an excellent panel here today, and I'm going to be old-fashioned, so I'm going to have a little bio on everybody, who everybody is. We have an excellent panel here to answer this question. So first, to my right is Milan Petkovic. So Professor Dr. Milan Petkovic is the head of the Data Science Department at Philips, which conducts innovation projects in the domain of AI and data science in healthcare. He's also a part-time full professor at the Eindhoven University of Technology. Professor Petkovic is also vice president of the Big Data Value Association, and he serves in several advisory groups to the European Commission on data sharing and security subjects. On behalf of Philips, he participated in several standardization initiatives and led several Dutch national and EU projects. He recently published a book on data science and healthcare. Now, let me go down the line. So our next panelist is from the Bay Area, Paul Abramson. Paul Abramson, Dr. Paul Abramson, MD, he started his career as a teenage computer hacker in the 1980s, then studied electrical engineering at Stanford before entering medical training and becoming a physician. He founded and directs My Doctor Medical Group, a personalized group medical practice in San Francisco, and is clinical assistant professor at the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine. Dr. Abramson consults and lectures on health technology and has a passion for protecting patient privacy, which led him to leave institutional medicine to start his current private practice. Then our third panelist is Philippe Boucher. He's the CEO of TILAC Healthcare. So Philippe Boucher is TILAC's Healthcare Chief Operating Officer, where he handles the creative, product, and marketing teams. He worked over 12 years in the mobile game industry, where he successively handled the position of executive producer and division manager at Gameloft. Philippe graduated from ESC Rennes in 2002 and also holds a master's degree from Telecom Paris Tech and HEC Paris. He previously had various experiences in strategic IT consulting and product marketing in the music industry. Last but not least is Xiangfeng Wu. Xiangfeng Wu serves as an associate research professor at the Institutum Jurisprudentiae Academia Sinica and an adjunct associate professor at the School of Public Health at Taiwan University and at the Institute of Health and Welfare Policy, National Yang-Ming University. He received his JSD from UC Berkeley and LLM from Harvard Law School. In addition to degrees in law, he also holds a master's degree in health and welfare policy and a bachelor's degree in public health. His fields of study include healthcare laws and ethics, international human rights, and the right to health and healthcare distributive justice. So the way the panel is organized is that each one of the panelists will have an about 5-minute conversation, and then we're going to have a few follow-up questions and then open it up to the audience for more questions. So I think first is Professor Petkovic. He's going to tell us about practical ways to make data available for AI in healthcare while still preserving privacy.
Oh, I wish. Yeah, so I'll start with elaborating a bit on the benefits that actually data brings to healthcare, and then the privacy aspect. So as we see, actually, healthcare is under transformation. So the industry is becoming digitized. It's becoming digital, so it's digitizing. We are collecting a lot of data, and at the same time, we see actually healthcare spending a big percentage of GDPR in US, also in Europe. If these trends continues, we will see in a number of years actually that healthcare will actually cost 50% of GDP, so that's very, very not sustainable. We also complain as people that we would like to have better health. So that's another challenge in healthcare. So to have better outcomes, on manage cost, even reduce the cost, but then have better outcomes. Next to that, we also would like to have as patients a good experience in healthcare. So you would like to be treated as human and also have a sort of a nice process growing to difficult times. And finally, you also have healthcare providers that are actually, if you look radiologists, then you see actually increasing rate of burnouts in that profession because people are now, healthcare providers are faced with a lot of data. They have to make difficult decisions and they have to do a lot. So there are many challenges and the promise of digital technologies is actually to help with these challenges. And we've seen in an example from Taiwan how artificial intelligence can help each of these challenges, can create better outcomes because we are talking about personalized medicine, talking about like trying to understand based on data and genomics, for example, as well as the lifestyle of a person, what the best treatment would be for the person. And for that, we need a lot of data. So we really have to put data together in order to be able to extract new knowledge, new medical knowledge. If we talk about efficiency in hospitals, again, data plays a crucial role because you need to follow the workflow in hospital with a lot of data to understand where are the bottlenecks, which parts you can improve. The same holds for experience of patients and healthcare providers. So we are working on one hand towards actually trying to get as much data as possible to create innovation. On the other hand, we are dealing with sensitive data, as you said. So we are dealing with data that is not only personal data, but it's actually sensitive data, which means that it's not only GDPR in Europe that would apply to this data, but that also all the national law in each member state in Europe would apply. All the laws related to sensitive data in each of these countries would apply on top of GDPR. And that makes actually life very difficult because especially for multinational companies that are having a market all around the world, they need to actually address all these privacy aspects in each particular country and try to find this balance between the two let's say the two extremes in terms of like trying to get as much data as possible and then definitely be responsible and protect patient privacy. So what is happening nowadays is that you have tools that you can use to de-identify data. In Europe, what we've seen is also that GDPR created a bit of like situation where for universities and companies it brought something new that they had to adapt to, and we've seen big projects that are sponsored by European Commission, subsidy projects that are research projects which struggled a bit into finding the ways to find this right balance between being responsible and ensure patient privacy and on the other hand, try to actually extract knowledge from data. And we are getting there in a way that we establish certain highways. How can we speed up these processes and ensure that we know how to de-identify the data, how to apply statistical de-identification and other processes, how to explore this data visiting term that I mentioned earlier today, but there are still things to be done to speed up this process. And one concept that I would like to mention is data donation. So how can we enable in Europe that each of us, next to, for example, ability to donate his or her organs, can donate data for research purposes? Can we facilitate as infrastructures that can enable this so that we can advance research in this domain?
Thank you very much. Let me just ask you one follow-up question maybe about GDPR. Do you think, people have sometimes become very worried about GDPR and privacy laws. Do you think GDPR has made life worse for European health researchers, or has it actually helped to sort of have a balanced balanced rights of different stakeholders who are involved. Do you think it's net positive or net negative, just from a research perspective for you?
Being a researcher as a professor, I would say that GDPR tries to find that good balance in protection and as well as enabling many ways to access data on legal basis for scientific purposes, for example. However, what I said, we still need to identify these highways that will help us actually to quickly resolve the gray area which is not legally clear, and then ensure that actually we are protecting privacy, but we also have speed into being able to access data.
Thank you very much. So our next panelist, our next speaker is going to be Dr. Abramson, who's going to talk to us about regular healthcare services and data privacy.
Great, thank you. Is this working? Hi, I'm going to talk about just regular old electronic health records in the United States, because I think this points out some challenges. I think Europe is a different environment right now, but in the United States, there's a very interesting situation going on that most people, even in the United States, don't know about at all. And that has to do with the centralization of healthcare in the United States, which has created a virtual monopoly on healthcare data in the hands of one person. And people don't even know this. But so as background, roughly 40% of the US health population have data stored by a company called Epic Systems. And they supply the health record software for virtually every academic medical center and most of the large hospital chains like Kaiser, Sutter, UPMC, Mayo Clinic, MD Anderson, Sloan Kettering, all of them are running on Epic. And this is a privately held company in the hands of one person, a woman who started it in 1978. She comes out of the sort of the old healthcare industry from the 60s. So she built a system based on MUMPS, which is the programming language, like sort of came about at the same time as Fortran in the 60s. And so the current system is still based on MUMPS underneath everything. But it has now expanded to be essentially, if you are Star Trek fans, it's the Borg. They literally own and run everything now. And almost all I think it's probably about 80% of people with private health insurance in the US have data in Epic, because a lot of the public health systems and the Veterans Administration don't run on Epic. So they have a huge market, basically monopoly. Everybody has to use them. And by going to a hospital, or a lot of the hospital systems also now own the individual clinics and doctors. I mean, there's very little private practice going on anymore. So in order to access care, you have to check a box saying, you can share my data worldwide. So if you are seen at a clinic at UCSF, and then you go to the MD Anderson in Texas, they pull you up and they can see everything that happened at UCSF 5 years ago. And every prescription drug, it pulls in information from pharmacy benefits plan data, from government data, from commercial pharmacies, and from every system. It links through something called Care Everywhere to every Epic implementation in the world. So this has some advantages. So the advantages are, I see you in the emergency department, I can pull up everything, you're unconscious because you just had a head trauma, and I can see everything that's going on with you, and I can treat you properly. It also has advantages for research, because now there's this massively linked data set of everything that's happened to everyone, and that could facilitate lots and lots of data mining and research. But actually, these are not the reasons why hospitals adopt Epic at all. The Epic's two main customers are the institutional systems and their billing and compliance. And the second is biopharma and research. And a distant third is the physician's user experience. And the almost non-existent is the patient. They have the user experience for the patient is terrible. There's no transparency. You don't know what's going on with your data. You don't own your data. You sign away all the rights to your data. It's all owned by the hospital chain and distributed by Epic. So this raises some problems. And so hospital compliance departments are incredibly happy. And I would say physicians are all burning out because the user experience of this is just terrible. I mean, it's barely better than the mumps days in the 60s. And it's made some very, very superficial improvements in the last 5 years, but almost nothing. On the compliance and billing side, though, if you can pull in every diagnosis you've ever been given in the world in 10 years for an individual patient, it builds a very large set of diagnoses, and reimbursement is mostly based on the number of diagnoses you have. So they actually get better hospital reimbursement based on the complexity of the data, and they can create very complex but mostly irrelevant data sets on people. The other thing is that reconciling all this data to produce what's true for you right now is a huge amount of human labor, and most of the physicians aren't able to keep up. So most people's charts are just a mess of data brought in from everywhere, and half of it's incorrect because a lot of healthcare data is created for billing purposes and isn't necessarily very clinically accurate. So this is kind of depressing. And I think if anyone's consumed healthcare in California, I could just pull up, I could give you a demonstration of how little privacy you have. But I think the point of this is that I think there is a need for, I think, more of a systems approach to handling healthcare data. And I think to do that, the monopoly of Epic has to be challenged somehow. And I think that will only occur due to government action. And I think there needs to be a shift from the center on the institution and their billing priorities to the individual patient, and have them be the hub with all the spokes going out where they control where their data goes. But this is going to fundamentally re-architect the US healthcare system. And I think it'll probably happen first in Europe, where GDPR has really changed the paradigm, and there is not so much of a single privately held company running the whole show in Europe. I think there's going to have to be some small test centers that create visibility, and there might have to be some very public demonstrations of how little privacy people have and how poorly their data is managed in the US to create public outcry and change.
Thank you, Paul. That's truly shocking. Yeah. Let me ask you one follow-up question.
Sure.
Is there anything that we as patients can do to protect ourselves, or essentially are we almost helpless against this Borg, how you called it?
Well, this does create some very stark social injustices, because if you have to use your insurance and you don't have very much money, then pretty much you have to go to vendors that run on Epic, and in most places in the US, and therefore you have to put your data in the system, and therefore you lose all control. If you have a large amount of money, you can go to a physician who understands these things, who can help direct you to consume services that are not linked into Epic, and pay cash for the right things, and use your insurance very judiciously so that you can keep your data from being shared into the system. But it requires a lot of work and resources. This would mostly be useful. Some of my patients have stigmatizing diagnoses, whether it's addiction or some various other kind of mental health diagnoses, where they really don't want to go to the ER and have this pop up where they might be discriminated against in a hospital setting. And so, or they are also a public figure or something. So they are willing to pay large amounts of money to maintain their privacy, but currently it's extremely difficult to do that.
Thank you very much, Paul. So,
and if you're poor, you don't have that option.
Got it.
So it's terrible.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Philippe Boucher, he's going to tell us now about privacy by design in healthcare applications, I think.
Yes, so, hold on. Yeah, it took some time. Okay, all right, thank you. So I'm going to talk about TLAC. TLAC was created in 2016, and our approach, given our backgrounds, I mean, I'm coming from the mobile video games industry, right? So on our side, we could have been like the Facebook guys. Simple as that. We collect everything because how you play the game is really important to us, not only for your experience as a customer, but also in a broader perspective. I'm trying to get patterns and larger understandings. So when we joined TLAC and when we built our systems, the privacy by design was something which was a bit, I would say, difficult for us at the beginning, because privacy by design states that you should collect only what you need. But when you're trying to identify patterns, should it be on behavioral data or I would say medical data, it's really, it gets complicated. So we took a bold move, we made it differently. We said we'll only collect on our side anonymized data, which connects to what you said earlier. So we have no way to connect you to the data we get from you. The only way for us to do that would be to have a doctor in our facility, and only the doctor could access to it. So we decided that this really specific relationship you have with your doctor when it comes to your, I would say, personal health information is yours and yours only. However, on my side, I really need that. Why? Because I need to improve my product, because the product needs to be better. I'm just giving you a simple example of privacy by design does not go against providing great healthcare service. We have a system in our first product which is about retinal disease. So you can download the application, which is prescribed by your doctor, and he will get your data points. So you will get visual acuity tests and a variety of tests alike. And from all this data we have, we created what we call an alert system. It's an algorithm that is going to check how your visual acuity goes up and down. And under a certain threshold and rules, it's going to warn you and warn your doctor at the same time that you should go for consultation. For many of us in this room, it's not important, but for patients who have what we call wet AMD and dry AMD, it's really critical that they get their injection on time, or you could lose vision. So that's why it was critical. And with all this huge amount of data we got, those data points, it really helped us pave the way to actually improve the product and improve the alert system. So I need this data badly, because without this data, my algorithm is quite dumb. And I'm not able to provide you the service, or I would say the value you put in my product. So it has two impacts. I said the first on the product, and it has two more impacts. The second one is on the structure, because on my side I'm in charge of operations, but I'm also making the product. So I'm always trying to see both sides of the coins. And when it comes to operations, and generally speaking, in some companies who have been using data, usually the GDPR was seen as a threat, was seen as this is from the legal and tech people. We're going to have to do that one way or another. On our side, it's different. Throughout the company, at every level, design, medical, quality and regulation, technical, legal, of course, and on my side, we have to consider the impact of this. And to make a better product, we need to consider it's part of the ecosystem. So that's what we did. Also, it means on the technical side, from the ground up, we had to build it with all, I would say, features in mind. So as of today, we are software as medical device. We are HIPAA compliant, GDPR compliant. We are CE marked. We are running through the ISO 13485 certification. We're a class 1 as medical device. So we didn't go very small on that, because the level of confidence that the patient gives you is really strong. So you want to make sure you give something back in return. So that's the second step. And the third step, which is really critical, because we're a small startup created 3 years ago, as I said earlier, the idea is that it really works also well with our stakeholders. Right now, we're being sponsored with a big pharma group. So having all these norms really helped them, I would say, understand that we were here for something more relevant than just gaming, or let's say just entertainment, that we were not a companion app, but there was something rigorous behind it. It really works well also with the notified bodies and with all instances, because with this huge amount of requirements we follow, we can then have better legitimacy toward what we do. And also, I would like to add that one of the most important things with the doctors, because the doctors are our partners, we work with them. So if we don't have clinical evidence, if we don't have safety measures, if we don't have double authentication system on the dashboard so they can access safely the data from their patients, if we don't have all, I would say, this suite and this service, it's really hard to get people on board. Some doctors we've been working with have been very, I would say, keen on making sure that we would also follow that. So this work hand in hand really works. And finally, the patient, which is the most important, which is why I kept him last. The patient today is, I would say, really keen on patient empowerment. You don't want that the state or Facebook or someone owns your data. So you need to be really sure that the patient is on board in giving his time and his data to what you need. And I think that the more we move forward indeed with the patient-oriented solution, the more likely we're going to have to explain to them. And it's pivotal in these days that you need to explain to patients what you're going to do with their data, that they can erase it, that they have access to it. We're working, and I'll close with that, with the US partner for a clinical trial, and they're also under Epic. So you have to really consider this part. There are ways to countermeasures to use, not to use Epic straightly, because it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources to be Epic compliant. So there are other platforms, but there are other EHR. So this is a huge universe, but we don't share our data with Epic, and we don't ask Epic to share their data with us. So in this way, we are more, I would say, free, and that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. One question, it's very laudable that your company has used privacy by design in its product development and process development and sharing with partners and all of this. Do you see that it's typical for the healthcare space, or is it really just very few forward-looking companies who are sort of implementing a privacy by design approach for their operations and for their product development?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I could answer for the whole industry, but I'd say that it's changing, and it's changing faster. I would say that if we had this panel 2 years ago, I could have said, no one's ready. But now things are changing. So I think that moving forward, the expectations and the amount of data we will get, the earlier presentations were absolutely great because they're forecasting a nice or a terrible future. So we have to make sure that every company understands it from the get-go. So this is my perspective.
Thank you very much. So now to our last panelist, Professor Wu, who is going to talk to us about challenges about using healthcare data in the era of data science, and is also going to include some specific legal challenges in Taiwan, as I understand it.
Yeah, thank you. I think we all know that the use of the healthcare data as a big data will bring great benefit for us. But the problem is that whether the traditional framework is enough for this kind of application. And I will try to find out, is there any legal or ethical challenges here? And the first challenge is the scope or the definition of personal data. Because as we all know that the definition of personal data is the information which can be used to identify the specific individual directly or indirectly. So the way to make a personal data to a non-personal data is to remove some variables or to anonymize those data. But the problem is that these kind of techniques are basically designed for some structured data. But in the big data era, we try to use more and more non-structured data. So how can we de-identify unstructured data? Because unstructured data, like the medical image, is kind of like non-personal data for general public. But for physician, they are very unique as an individual face. So if we want to de-identify the non-structured data, the problem is that do we just remove those kind of personal information out of the medical image? Will that be enough? Or do we need to blur those kind of medical image? But if we blur those kind of medical image, the utility will decrease. So I think the first challenge is that what kind of the scope of the concept of the personal data will change. And the other thing is that the big data intends to produce extensive knowledge about all kinds of newly found populations rather than individual profiles. In other words, they don't need individual profiles. They can only use some kind of non-personal data. They can still produce lots of kind of knowledge. And due to the development of the information technology, the knowledge produced by big data increases the possibility of re-identification. So during this kind of development, could we still limit our understanding of personal data in the traditional way? Or should we try to develop different kind of conservation of personal data in this kind of the big data era? And I think the second challenge is about the individual consent, because the big data intends to discover unexpected knowledge from irrelevant data. And the big data often uses data originally collected for other purposes. Therefore, it is almost impossible to identify the specific purpose when collecting individuals' data. So in the traditional way we collect healthcare data, we need to tell patients what kind of specific purpose we need to use. But in this case, we can find out we cannot use the specific purpose when we collect this kind of data in the big data era. So the use of broad consent or dynamic consent is necessary. But the broad consent is also regarded as a restriction of individuals' privacy autonomy. Therefore, it is then important to clarify when it is justified to use broad consent and how to disclose relevant following up information to the individuals. For example, individuals might want to know where their data go and for what purposes. Then data controller then should have the obligation to disclose the information as soon as he releases the data. And the third challenge would be the individual control of healthcare information. And it is related to individuals' right to have their data removed or to be transferred to other entity. And I think we discussed earlier this morning that the context of the privacy. And from my perspective, I think privacy is very important to individual because it is a possibility for individual to develop more flexible personality. And it is essential for individuals to preserve the possibility to develop more flexible personality. Therefore, even though the personal healthcare information has been collected by the entity, by the enterprise, or they have some kind of reuse of the kind of data, I think individuals still maintain the right to control those kind of healthcare information. And the other challenge is about the justice, and it's related to the establishment of a monitorable mechanism of the use or the collection of healthcare information. Because the use of healthcare data might create some kind of health inequality and worsen the health distributive injustice, and might indirectly influence individuals' social determinants of health. For example, those with control over medical records, like medical centers, or like the enterprise you just mentioned, or some kind of online resources, like the mobile medical apps, have immense powers. But healthcare information in most countries, they are not able to fully digitize this kind of information, or even they digitize this kind of information, they cannot create it in a standardized uniform code for data entry, storage, or use. Therefore, enterprise which have resources to digitize or medical records and to develop the SOP would grant the advantage and the powers to define healthcare in the future. So in the worst scenario, lots of studies show that the use of the health care information might create some kind of implied discrimination. So the establishment of some kind of monitorable mechanism is very important. And the final challenge is the data minimization, because the amount of personal data should be restricted to the minimum amount possible. So when we try to use the healthcare data, especially this kind of data is sensitive data, it is necessary to decide what kinds of healthcare data and how much information can be collected and used for what purpose. And some scholars then propose that an ethical committee might be established to review the collection and the use of healthcare data and to decide whether it is justified. And finally, I want to mention that in Taiwan, because Taiwan has the national health insurance, and we have 23 million people's healthcare data. And the government reviews this kind of data to research without consent or to commercial use with consent. And because the data is too enormous, so the human rights advocacy group actually brings some suit against the government for review this kind of data. And the case now is pending in the Constitutional Court. I just mentioned this because I think we still face lots of different kind of challenges in the near future about using the healthcare data. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wu. I have one follow-up question coming from Taiwan. I mean, we heard a little bit about the American approach to healthcare privacy. There is none. Lack of that. About the European one, which is fairly good, how would you characterize the approach in Asia? And of course, that's a very general question, but how would you characterize it perhaps for some countries you'd like to focus on? How are they approaching healthcare privacy in the age of technology and big data? Is there anything?
It's a very interesting question because that in Taiwan, the legal system, basically we inherited the legal system from United States or from Europe. But when we try to develop the Personal Data Protection Act, we follow Europeans' perspective. But in practice, we follow United States perspective. So it kind of creates the gap. So like we have the Human Subject Research Act, we follow United States. So there's a gap there. So that's why we face the challenge even more than like in Europe or in United States, because at least they have the how do I say, the harmonized standards, but we have the conflicting standards here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Wonderful. So let me ask one question to the panel and whoever wants to answer it, and then I'll open it up for questions for the audience. So my question is that these days, major tech companies, I mean, all of them, I think Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, Apple, they're all active in the healthcare domain. And obviously, they have all these tools for analyzing and collecting data, and they have these incredible capabilities. What do you think might that create in terms of issues for privacy and security, or also for the sheer economic power that these companies are, that are already incredibly powerful in one space of life, now become powerful in another era? And for those of us who don't like it, what can we do against it? Or what can you all do against it if you don't like it? So does anybody want to take?
So health data, from what I understand from my marketing friends, is the most valuable kind of data. When it's identified to an individual,
Black market.
it's incredibly valuable to marketers. And so currently, they can get this data from a variety of sources, but I think this new healthcare involvement of the major tech companies provides them a really clear pathway to that. And I think you have to look at the business models of the companies involved and whether they primarily make money from users' data or whether they make money from hardware and services. Like Apple is a little more focused on hardware and services. Google is a little, and Facebook are more focused on selling you as the product. So I think that that can give you some look at that. But I don't know that this is headed in the right direction, because your data is going to be fragmented out into a very large ecosystem. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else on this?
I think that because, as you just mentioned, the health data is some kind of valuable data, and the most important thing is that it influences people's life very much. And especially health inequality has existed globally, and it might even worsen the health inequality. So I think when we talk about healthcare data, we should distinguish the influence from general data and healthcare data, and some kind of special factors like transparency, or like some the influence on health equality or justice, or some kind of the private autonomy should be included when we evaluate, and the government or some kind of regulation should be established, especially for healthcare data.
Your personal data is yours. So down the road, it would be state-owned, and the state would, the regulator, sorry, would act as a gatekeeper to make sure that your personal data is not too fragmented. So you could say, okay, my heart rate data belongs to Apple now, and my visual acuity belongs to TILAC. So, I mean, every company could still get their own share when it comes to selling it back. However, from a patient perspective, I think it would be better. But this initiative is quite new, so it's going to take some time and some efforts, let's say.
Yeah, so there is regulation, obviously, and we have HIPAA and we have GDPR and all the national laws. I think the worry could be that we can get in a situation that what we see now happening with personal data in commercial applications, very easy consent, actually, just to get a service, that maybe we will, you know, get this also in healthcare. But I think just raising awareness and sort of bringing actually population on a level to understand what they are actually giving up is probably the way forward to just sort of prevent this from happening.
Thank you very much. So let's now open it up for questions from the audience.
Across the world, are there any pending efforts to sort of adopt an international standard across, across the globe, so that raise the ones like the U.S. where it's pitiful, and have a sort of a uniform standard, best practice, nothing like that?
I mean,
but is anyone even trying?
No.
Well, I mean, I think GDPR does give you a valid framework where it puts the patient or the person at the center of the data hub. I just think the U.S. will never get to the point that they would accept something like that, because our entire infrastructure is built opposite. So you'd have to burn down the entire healthcare system and start over. And that's
Burn, baby, burn.
yeah. I mean, well, that's sort of my vision. California's burning. Why not the whole healthcare system? But but it's daunting, and I think it's going to have to be more grassroots in the U.S., not from top down, regular, because the lawmakers won't burn it down.
I completely agree with you about GDPR generally being adopted in the U.S. No, zero chance of that. I was thinking that maybe healthcare data just alone, all by itself, GDPR only for personal healthcare data, maybe would have a better shot.
I would love that, but I think healthcare is more constipated than even any other part of the economy.
That's your bad.
Yeah, so there was
burn. We could let burn go, but not constipated. No.
so GDPR.
Companies have tried the patient-centered health record. Big, powerful companies.
Oh yeah, like Microsoft, Google.
Speaking of Google and Microsoft, so even they failed.
Yeah, they tried it for probably about 3 or 4 years.
Oh no, more than Google Health was around for like 8, and like Microsoft Health Vault was around for like 10 years.
Just too many forces
and
against them.
They just imploded via lack of interest.
That's correct. And I mean, talking about GDPR, GDPR had a chance actually maybe also to regulate healthcare data, but it was not the case, because nowadays in Europe we have GDPR, but for healthcare data, in each country, in each member state, you have a national law which is different. And that regulates healthcare data because it's sensitive data. It's not only personal, but sensitive data.
Yes, and
so it's actually not technically subject to GDPR?
Even in Europe, you don't have one market for healthcare data. So you have member states. And even in some member states, like Germany, you have states that have their own law, federal states, they have their own national law. So that's the problem we have in Europe.
It's true, and I mean, because this is what we're experiencing at TILAC. We're HIPAA compliant, so that's okay for the US. We're GDPR, and this huge list is not really helping. We are also, because we're a small company, we're trying to get funds and everything, trying to get to the healthcare system. So in France, we have this thing which is pretty new. It's called Article 51. It's about telemedicine and about ways to help new companies bring new solutions to improve patients' life and patient outcomes, and etc., and use real-world evidence. So maybe we're just at the beginning of it. So that's why, to answer your question, eventually.
Enough, then never.
Would you have a problem sharing information about patients without giving their names? Like, if you say,
maybe.
without mentioning my name, you give my age, my medical situation, what medicine I take, but without would that be an infringement on privacy?
It's been pretty definitively shown that with a very small amount of medical data, and you correlate with other databases, you can re-identify everything. If you have anything like your zip code plus, or your region, plus your health conditions, plus your income, or some, just a few things, and you can re-identify people. So, and AI and big data is just going to magnify that. So I think the illusion, if you truly de-identify data, you remove all information. Like there's no utility to truly de-identify data. You can't. I mean, if you make data anonymous, it's useless. So I think that's an illusion, and the only solution is to flip the entire thing and have patients give granular permissions for the use of their own data, and that will be a lot more work. There's no way to anonymize data at all. It's a farce. If anyone talks about
So this data actually it's still in use. So you can imagine that there is a copy in clinics with names and let's say healthcare data, vital signs or whatever. Yeah. And if you say, okay, I will de-identify this data, but just like HIPAA would say 18 attributes you cut, and then you get only vital signs and you give it to someone, then you have to ensure that someone doesn't have a chance to get to this data which is still in use, and actually hospitals are by law asked to keep that data there. So that also creates a big difficulty.
Right, and also the non-structured data like text. Like right now, Epic, the evil Epic, keeps a lot of, doctors' notes are not sort of codified into discrete discrete fields. It's just text. And so what if you had to take the patient's name off it, but then it mentions their name in the text? I don't think anybody's going through the free text and screening that for identifiable data, where it's mentions like what their grandfather did, or any sort of information in that chart can be used to re-identify it, and there's no way to really. It's very hard. It's very hard.
And then just to make it a bit more complex, then if you think about personalized medicine, then genomics and all this data that is per se you cannot de-identify is there, and that really makes it very difficult.
Now then, let me ask one last question. I mean, we heard about all these problems. Are there any good places, resources, organizations where people who are interested can go to learn more, for example, on privacy by design in healthcare, or how to do better with health records, or how to do the databases that you described in Taiwan, or how to do privacy and AI for healthcare? I mean, are there good resources where people can go to learn who want to do things better from a technical and policy and procedural perspective?
I can suggest maybe a big European project called Big Metalytics, which is a large-scale pilot project with more than 40 consortium members that had 12 different pilots, and which actually created a big large-scale pilots in terms of applying big data in healthcare and showing the different ways how you can actually still have a good balance between privacy protection, be actually responsible and following the regulation in Europe, GDPR, and also different national law, because it's a European project. That will give best practices, basically how to deal with this.
And I think that it's a very difficult question for me, because that I cannot decide which side I should have, because that on the one hand, I think international guidelines or international standard should be helpful, because that, for example, like United States have HIPAA to remove that 18 item files, but it might not pass the test of the anonymization in EU. But when they don't have the standards, they don't harmonize this kind of the privacy requirement. Other countries want to see which way is possible for me and which way is better for me. I will choose that way, because healthcare data equals economic development. I will choose the way I want to go. But on the other hand, privacy should be decided by the society culture. For example, like in the United States, the 18 identifiers was decided during that time under the social context. So if we have some kind of standard, universal standards there, different societies' privacy, the conception of privacy might be restricted, because they need to follow one standard of privacy. So I cannot decide which side I should take one, but I think we need to try to find a balance here. Yeah.
Any other comments?
I mean, I would ask your physician what their electronic health records are and how your data is shared, and what consequences might be based on where you consume healthcare. And most physicians will look at you like you're crazy. So choose another one.
I look forward to that conversation.
Another crazy one. We'll also tell you you're crazy.
Yeah.
Good luck finding one who won't.
There's a little marketing there, yeah.
Philip, do you have some last suggestions for privacy by design?
Yes, if you want to look into it, you should always start with the user, your patient. So be user-centric. Sounds basic, but everybody tends to forget that. Simple as that. And the second one is that there, in every country, there are commissions and websites that give you a lot of data. In France, you have the CNIL. There's some in Luxembourg. There's some in Germany. You have some things on the FDA and FCC websites. So there's a lot of intel already available if you want to get up to speed on that topic.
All right. Thank you. Let's thank our excellent panel.